across the world, something is shifting, quietly, steadily, and in some places very quickly. More and more people are stepping away from religion, not just drifting, but turning, choosing a life without belief in gods, without sacred texts, without the rituals and structures that once seemed immovable. The numbers are not subtle anymore. They're being seen in surveys, in national censuses, in social patterns, and in simple conversations people are having at their dinner tables. This rise didn't happen overnight. It's been building for decades, but the 21st century has pushed it further than before. People are not just questioning the stories they were raised with. They're leaving them behind, and the reasons go deeper than a loss of interest. What we're seeing isn't just a cultural trend, it's a reflection of how the world is changing, how information moves, how people think, and how they respond to old systems in a new age. In the past, religion was often the default. People didn't choose it, they were born into it. It framed every part of life from birth to death, from marriage to morality. It shaped calendars, controlled power, and offered answers to questions people didn't have the tools to explore. But that default has started to erode. And one of the biggest reasons is access to information. The internet changed everything, not because it tells people what to believe, but because it removes the filters. Anyone, anywhere can research ancient texts, scientific discoveries, historical inconsistencies, and opposing views, all in a single evening. And that changes how people think about ideas they used to accept without question. In essence, when you grow up hearing one version of truth and then realize that dozens of versions exist, each claiming to be the only correct one, something shifts. People begin to recognize patterns. They see how belief often depends on geography. A child raised in Cairo is likely to follow Islam. A child raised in Salt Lake City is likely to grow up Mormon. In India, the gods have different names. In Thailand, different rituals. And yet each of these faiths claims unique access to truth. When you put them side by side, the contradictions become impossible to ignore. That's not rebellion, that's pattern recognition. Science plays a major role in this shift too, not because science is cold or anti-spiritual, but because it offers explanations grounded in evidence. It doesn't require belief, it invites doubt, and that matters, especially to younger generations who have grown up surrounded by technology, GPS, medical breakthroughs, satellites, DNA tests, quantum mechanics. These things don't just make life easier, they show us that the universe works according to laws we can study, understand, and predict. It doesn't mean science has every answer, but it doesn't pretend to. Religion often does. It offers complete stories, start to finish, about where we came from, why we're here, and where we're going after we die. But those stories were written in a world that didn't have modern medicine, or telescopes, or even a basic understanding of germs. And that gap between ancient texts and modern knowledge gets wider every year. There's also a shift in how people view morality. For a long time, religion was seen as the foundation of ethics, the source of right and wrong. But more people are starting to ask, does being good really require belief or fear of punishment? Studies suggest it doesn't. In countries where religion is less dominant, places like Sweden, Japan, the Netherlands, crime rates are not higher, in fact, they're often lower. That opens the door to something important, the idea that kindness, fairness, and compassion don't need to come from a divine command. They can come from empathy, from shared experience, from a desire to reduce harm and increase well-being. And when that becomes clear, the moral argument for religion starts to lose its force. Another factor is transparency, or the lack of it. People are increasingly aware of scandals, cover-ups, and abuses of power within religious institutions. Whether it's child abuse in churches, financial corruption in televangelist ministries, or extremist teachings in isolated sects, the damage is real, and once trust is broken, it's hard to rebuild. Many people don't walk away from belief because they want to reject meaning. They walk away because they see a disconnect between what's preached and what's practiced, between the values written in scriptures and the actions of those who claim to follow them. That hypocrisy, that gap, is one of the quiet drivers of modern disbelief. There's also a generational change. Younger people today are less likely to identify with religion than their parents or grandparents. In the U.S., surveys by Pew Research show that the percentage of people who call themselves religiously unaffiliated, sometimes called nones, has been growing steadily. In 1972, it was about 5%. Today, it's over 30% among young adults, and demagogic properties help makes them more non-adult, and that number keeps climbing. It's not just about walking away, it's about growing up in a world where religion feels optional, not essential, where social bonds, purpose, and identity can be built outside of church walls, through music, activism, art, science, relationships, even solitude. There's also a growing discomfort with absolutism, the idea that one belief system holds the ultimate truth and all others are wrong. That kind of thinking feels out of place in a world where people work across borders, live in multicultural cities, and interact online with people from every background imaginable. Certainty begins to feel out of step with reality. At the same time, there's a broader cultural shift toward authenticity. People want to feel that what they believe aligns with what they experience. If a worldview requires pretending that evidence doesn't matter or that doubt is a failure, then it starts to feel dishonest. The rise of atheism is often not a rejection of meaning, but a search for it without pretense. Another reason more people are walking away is that the old emotional tools of religion, fear of hell, promise of heaven, don't hold the same weight anymore. Fear works less when people stop believing in the premise, and heaven feels less urgent when this life is rich, diverse, and meaningful in itself. When people build lives full of love, curiosity, and beauty here and now, the idea of needing a reward later becomes less convincing. It's also worth noticing how modern life offers new forms of connection and purpose. People build communities through shared interests, not shared dogma. They find meaning through creativity, discovery, learning, helping others. They don't need a church or a doctrine to feel awe. They find it in the stars, in the ocean, in the complexity of a single cell. And more than anything, people are beginning to see that not knowing is okay, that mystery isn't something to be filled with ancient answers. It can be lived with. Questioning isn't failure, it's freedom. The rise in atheism isn't about arrogance. It's not about claiming to have every answer. It's often the opposite. It's about stepping out from inherited frameworks and facing the world as it is. Vast, uncertain, and full of potential. And in that space, people are building new ways to live. Ways that don't rely on being told what to think. That don't rest on sacred texts or eternal rules, but on reason, evidence, and the shared human experience. This shift isn't driven by anger. It's driven by honesty, a desire to see clearly, to ask real questions and be okay with real answers, even when they're incomplete. The world has changed, and belief is changing with it. Some will hold on, many will adapt, but more and more people are realizing that they don't need to believe in the supernatural to live fully human lives. Lives with depth, purpose, joy, and responsibility. Grounded not in stories from the past, but in the present moment, in each other, and in the pursuit of truth. The movement away from religion doesn't always start with big debates or long books. Often, it begins quietly. A question that doesn't have a clear answer, a moment of doubt that keeps coming back, a feeling that something doesn't quite add up. These small cracks in certainty grow over time. Not because someone is looking for an excuse to leave, but because the answers offered by religion don't always meet the questions people are actually asking. And those questions today are different from the ones people asked in the past. Modern people aren't wondering whether lightning is a sign of divine anger. They're asking why suffering exists if there's an all-powerful, loving God. They're asking why so many religious leaders live in comfort while millions of believers live in poverty. They're asking why a God who created billions of galaxies would care what you wear, eat, or believe about ancient tribal stories. These are not rebellious questions, they're thoughtful ones. And the more people ask them, the more they see that religion isn't answering them, it's avoiding them. Or worse, it's punishing people for even asking. This is where the cultural change becomes important. In the past, questioning faith came with a high price. In some places, it still does. But in much of the world today, it's safer to be open about doubt. Safer to say, "I don't believe that," or "I'm not sure anymore." The internet, books, podcasts, and open conversations have created a space where people don't have to hide what they're thinking. And when one person speaks up, others follow. Because many people are thinking the same thing, but they thought they were alone. That's how change spreads, not through force, but through honesty. There's also a growing awareness of how religion shapes identity. In many places, being part of a faith isn't just about belief, it's about belonging. It's tied to family, to community, to tradition. So when someone steps away from religion, it's not just about theology, it's personal. It can mean distance from loved ones, social tension, even rejection. But still, more people are doing it because they feel like truth matters more than comfort. The courage to walk away often starts with a simple realization: belief is not the same as truth. Just because an idea feels familiar or gives comfort doesn't make it real. And just because many people believe something doesn't make it right. People used to believe the earth was flat, that disease was caused by demons, that slavery was natural. Belief alone doesn't justify anything. Though when someone leaves religion, it's often because they're no longer willing to pretend. They've stopped repeating words that no longer feel true. They've stopped calling something sacred just because it's old. And they've started asking what it means to live a good, meaningful life without having all the answers handed to them. This isn't about rejecting community or values. In fact, many people find stronger values after leaving religion, because now those values are chosen, not inherited. Compassion, honesty, responsibility, they matter more when they're not tied to fear or reward. They come from inside, not from a rule book. Another reason for the rise in disbelief is the changing role of authority. In the past, religious leaders held power because they were seen as moral guides. But trust in that kind of authority has been breaking down. People are less willing to follow blindly. They want transparency, accountability, consistency. And when they see religious leaders acting in ways that contradict their teachings, whether it's greed, abuse, or dishonesty, that trust collapses. And unlike in the past, these failures can't be hidden easily anymore. They spread online, they spark discussions, and they make people think harder about what they've been told. This doesn't just create anger, it creates questions. And those questions, once asked, are hard to unask. People are also changing how they view suffering. Religion often says that suffering has a purpose, that it's a test, a punishment, or part of a divine plan. But for many, that answer feels empty. Watching a child die of cancer or a family starve during a drought doesn't lead to reverence. It leads to silence, to deep discomfort, and eventually to doubt. If this is part of a plan, then what kind of plan is it? Instead of forcing themselves to believe, more people are choosing to accept what they don't know. They're not rushing to replace religion with a new system. They're simply asking better questions and refusing to settle for bad answers. At the same time, more people are realizing that meaning doesn't have to come from outside, that a finite life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be embraced. The idea that this is our one life doesn't make it less valuable, it makes it more. Every moment matters more when you know it won't come again. There's also a growing number of people who don't reject all spirituality, but who no longer accept religion's claims. They may meditate or explore philosophical ideas or feel connected to nature or the universe, but they don't feel the need to name that feeling or attach it to a system of rules and rituals. They're comfortable with not knowing. In this new landscape, disbelief isn't something people hide. It's something they explore, not in anger but with curiosity, not as a rejection of meaning but as a search for it on their own terms. What's also changing is how children are being raised. More parents today are choosing not to teach religion as fact. They might expose their kids to different beliefs, but they let them decide. They teach critical thinking, open inquiry, and the value of asking why. And that changes everything. Because belief passed down without question tends to stay unchallenged. But once kids are encouraged to think for themselves, the results are very different. And once a generation grows up without being told they need faith to be good, or prayer to be safe, or a God to be whole, that generation starts asking what role religion really needs to play at all. The rise of atheism, then, isn't about rebellion, it's about maturity. About facing life without stories we've outgrown, about living in truth even when it's uncertain, about building lives rooted in reality, instead of reaching for promises no one can prove. And the more people see that they're not alone in doing that, the faster the shift continues. Not with noise, not with fire and protests, but with simple, quiet decisions. People choosing to live differently, to think carefully, to feel deeply, to be human fully, honestly, and awake.